I'm sitting here on the front steps of the church building, and this is one of my favorite spots on all the church property for a few reasons. I've spent a lot of time out here on these front steps praying, thinking, watching the traffic go by. You can see the road that the church sits on here close behind me. And you can also see Interstate 71 back behind me with all the traffic going by there. And really it's because of 71 there it's one of the reasons it's my favorite spots to sit out here, watch the traffic go by, and just kind of think, like I said, pray a little bit. And often I have sat out here as I'm watching the traffic go by, and I often wonder where everybody's headed. You know, where are they off to? Why are they traveling up and down the road there? Are they going someplace that they're looking forward to? Are they excited about the destination that they're traveling towards? Are they dreading where they're headed? Is it a sad time for them? Maybe it's just a regular old day. Maybe they're traveling back and forth to work. There's a lot of different reasons that all those cars that you see back there are traveling. A lot of different reasons they're on that road. But I enjoy sitting out here and watching the traffic go by. In our lives, there's a lot of different roads that we can take. A lot of different highways that we can find ourselves on. A lot of different paths that we can take. A lot of different destinations in our lives. And what I have found out is that there is no better road to be on than the straight and narrow path, the straight and narrow road that the Lord has for you in your life. No better place to be than where the Lord wants you to be. There's a verse that I found that really deals with this, and it's in Psalm 16, and it's verse number 11. Let me read that to you. Psalm 16:11. Thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. When we are earnestly seeking God's will for our lives, and we're trying our very best to follow His will, to follow the direction that He has set, and to travel that path that God has for us, we see the results here in this verse. There are a lot of paths that we can pick on our own that would take us in a direction that we do not want to go down, and take us to places that we do not want to go. But we see in this verse that if we're earnestly seeking God and seeking Him with all of our hearts and doing our very best to follow Him, we see the results. Let's look at this verse again. It says, "Thou wilt show me the path of life." God will show us the path of life, the path that leads to abundance of joy in our lives. Listen, we can pick paths that will take us to the opposite of what that verse says. We can pick paths for ourselves and go down certain roads that lead us to a destination, that take us to places of heartache, that take us to places of sorrow, that will take us to places of consequences in our lives that we don't want to face. But when we are seeking the Lord and following His direction in our lives, it says that Thou, O Lord, will show me the path of life. The verse goes on to say this: in thy presence is fullness of joy. In the presence of God, there is fullness of joy. When we are in right fellowship with God and following Him, and there's nothing coming in between the two of us, there's nothing hindering our walk with God. When we are in His presence, the verse says, there is fullness of joy. Not just a little joy, not just some joy, but it says that our lives, we would have the fullness of joy in the presence of God. That's when we're on the path that he would have us take. Not all paths are that way. The verse goes on to say this: at thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. At the right hand of God, when we are right there close to him, when we are in right fellowship with him, it says that there are pleasures forevermore. There are blessings forevermore. In this lifetime, there are pleasures, there are blessings, and in the life beyond this world, there is eternal blessings. There are eternal pleasures when we're at the right hand of God. Now, I want to make this point very clear. I don't want this verse to be misinterpreted in any way. This verse is not saying that in the path of life or on the road of life, in our journey of life, that there won't be tough times, that we won't run into some potholes on the highway of life. It's not saying that at all. It's not saying that there won't be any roadblocks or detours. It's not saying that there won't be any traffic jams on the highway of life. It's not saying that at all. Scripture is very clear that we will have tough times. Even the most faithful followers of Jesus will have tough times, will have trials, will have tribulations in their lives. That's the truth. Scripture bears that truth. But what this verse is saying is that when we are traveling the path that God has set before us, when we are going down that straight and narrow way, that road that God has before us, when we are traveling that road, this verse tells us this, that will show me the path of life. Despite all of the trials, the tribulations, the heartaches, the tough times of life, this verse promises us that God will show us the path of life. Even through valleys, even through tough times, God will show us how to focus on the good, how to focus on the positive, how to focus on the blessings, because they are always there, even in the rough times. Even in the tough times of life, this verse says, in thy presence is fullness of joy. Even when we're going through the toughest trials of our lives, if we are still in the presence of God, even in the valleys, we can have the fullness of joy in him. We can be strong in him. We can endure and be steadfast because of him. In thy presence, the presence of God, is fullness of joy. That's the path of God. That will give that. The paths we choose sometimes do not lead to the fullness of joy, but God always does. In his presence there is that. The verse goes on to say, at thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Even as we're traveling through the road of life, through the tough times, through the darkest of times in our own lives, when we are at the right hand of God, when we are in the presence of God, there are pleasures forevermore. There are blessings forevermore. He promises us that. And so when we think about our lives and we think about the paths that we go down, the paths that we choose, I would encourage you and remind you this once again. There is no better path. There is no better road to go down. No better direction to go than the direction that God has for your life. To go down that straight and narrow path that he has for you. And so just let me encourage you, wherever you are in life, wherever you find yourself, whatever road you are on, let me remind you of this. And I would encourage you and challenge you to do this. Seek the Lord's will. Follow his direction in your life. Stay on that straight and narrow path that God will lead you down. And allow him to show you the path of life. Stay in his presence and experience the fullness of joy that can only be found in him. Stay at his right hand, and he promises there are pleasures forevermore in the life here and for eternity beyond. Seek the Lord with all your heart. Love you all. May God bless you all.